All right, let's talk about the 12th President of the United States, Zachary Taylor. And he is a fascinating guy, just a man of total contradictions. I mean, think about it. A celebrated war hero who had never even voted, and a very wealthy slave owner who, somehow, became the single biggest roadblock to the expansion of slavery. It just doesn't seem to add up.
So that brings us to the big mystery here. In 1848, Zachary Taylor was, without a doubt, one of the most famous men in America. So how on earth did he end up as a footnote? How does a guy like that get ranked in the bottom tier of presidents? Someone most people barely remember.
I mean, just look at the contrast. It is so stark. On one side, you've got the hero, old, rough, and ready, a national icon. On the other, a president who was only in office for 16 months and is often summed up with his brutal quote, "More a forgettable president than a failed one." Ouch. So this is the paradox we're going to try and figure out today.
To really get the president, you have to start with the general. And Taylor didn't just pop up out of nowhere. His reputation, his whole persona, was forged over a really tough 40-year military career that basically took him all over the American frontier.
I mean, his service started all the way back in 1808. He had the first American land victory in the War of 1812. He was there for the Black Hawk War. But it was down in the swamps of Florida during the Second Seminole War that he really became a legend among his men. That's where he got the nickname Old Rough and Ready, because he was right there in the mud with them, sharing all the same hardships. But the thing that turned him into a household name, that was the Mexican-American War.
Suddenly, his popularity just exploded. He leads his troops to this incredible string of victories, often against armies that were way bigger than his own. The Battle of Buena Vista? That was the big one. His totally outnumbered army just crushed the Mexican forces. After that, newspapers all over the country started comparing him to George Washington and Andrew Jackson. He was a superstar.
And all that fame, well, it leads us to one of the weirdest presidential elections in American history, where a guy with absolutely zero interest in politics gets swept into the White House.
Seriously, just stop and think about this for a second. The man the Whig Party wanted as their presidential candidate had never been a governor, never been a congressman, not even a town mayor. In fact, get this, he had never even bothered to vote, not once in his life. He was completely, totally apolitical.
And you know, he wasn't just being shy about it. When people first started talking about him running for president, this was his actual response. He thought the whole idea was insane. But the Whig Party, they saw a golden ticket. They figured, hey, a war hero worked for us with William Henry Harrison, let's do it again. And here's the crazy part. He won, but without even getting a majority of the vote. You see, the Democratic Party split. The former president, Martin Van Buren, ran on this new anti-slavery free soil ticket, and he siphoned off just enough votes. This split basically allowed Taylor, the popular war hero who was kind of vague on the actual issues, to sneak into the White House with just over 47%.
Okay, so he's in office, but there was no time to settle in. This apolitical general gets thrown right into the middle of the most explosive, dangerous issue of the day, slavery, and what to do with all the new land won from Mexico.
And this is the great paradox of Zachary Taylor. You have to wrap your head around this. He was a rich Southerner. His entire personal fortune was built on the labor of more than 100 enslaved people on his plantation. And yet, as president, he became the #1 opponent of expanding slavery into those new Western territories. Why? Because he thought it would rip the country apart.
His plan was pure, Taylor. Simple, direct, just like a military campaign. He told the settlers in California and New Mexico, look, just skip the whole messy territorial phase, write your own constitutions, and apply to be states right now. He knew, and this was the brilliant part, that they would both vote to ban slavery. And just like that, the problem would be solved, and he could completely bypass a furious, deadlocked Congress.
And if you think he was bluffing, well, he was not messing around. When Southern leaders started threatening to secede over his plan, the old general told them exactly what he thought. His loyalty to the Union was absolute. It came before everything else, even before the interests of his fellow Southerners.
But this massive confrontation, this epic political showdown, it never actually happened. Because just 16 months into his term, Taylor's presidency came to a sudden, shocking end. And it kicked off a mystery that would last for almost 150 years.
Right away, people started whispering. Was it foul play? Did pro-slavery Southerners poison him with arsenic to get him out of the way? This rumor was so strong, so persistent, that in 1991, yes, 1991, they actually exhumed his body. Scientists took samples of his hair and fingernails to test for arsenic,
And the verdict? Nope, no poison. He died of acute gastroenteritis, probably from some contaminated food or water he had on a hot 4th of July in a city that, back then, had terrible sanitation.
So, that brings us all the way back to our original question. If he wasn't a failure and he wasn't assassinated, why is he so forgettable? Well, the answer, it turns out, has less to do with his actions in the White House and a lot more to do with a fire.
According to the Library of Congress, after Taylor died, most of his personal letters and presidential papers were shipped down to his son, Richard's plantation in Louisiana. Then, years later, during the Civil War, Union troops raided that plantation, and in the chaos, the vast majority of Taylor's writings, his thoughts, his plans, his records, they were just destroyed, gone forever.
We lost the primary sources, the very things historians need to build a full, detailed picture of who someone really was. So when researchers go looking for his papers today, trying to understand him, they often get this simple, powerful, and kind of haunting result. His story is, in so many ways, literally missing.
Which leaves us with one last question to think about. Was Zachary Taylor a forgettable president? Someone whose short time in office just wasn't that significant? Or is he a forgotten one? A president whose true story, whose real impact and character were basically erased by the very same war he tried so desperately to prevent?